So today we're going to tackle a really fascinating question, one that's right at the center of some of the most heated arguments you see online. How do we even define what's true when we're talking about a text as ancient and, as important as the Bible? Okay, so it all kicks off with this, a post on X from a pastor, and he's asking a question that really gets to the core of faith for millions of people. If the Bible isn't 100% literally factually true, does the whole foundation of Christianity just crumble? It's a huge question, a real high-stakes challenge. But then, almost immediately, you get a counterclaim. Another user pushes right back, saying, nope, their version of the scriptures. That's the one that's 100% true. And just like that, you can see the battle lines being drawn. Two totally absolute claims right next to each other. And, well, you know how it goes online. The debate didn't stay on theology for very long. It went downhill, and it went downhill fast. This comment, which was hidden by the platform, is just full of awful anti-Semitic hate. And it just goes to show how quickly these conversations can spiral into something really toxic, tapping into these centuries-old conflicts. You see, what we're looking at here isn't just some random argument on Twitter. The source material we're exploring today makes the case that this is really just a symptom of a much, much older and deeper conflict about the nature of truth itself. So that brings us to the big mystery, right? Why does this one text spark these incredibly fierce, totally contradictory, and super personal fights? When people are arguing about the Bible, what are they actually arguing about? And this is where the source we're looking at proposes a really interesting way to think about it. What if the whole conflict isn't about which side is right, but it's about the fact that they're using two completely different measuring sticks for what true even means in the first place? So on one hand, you've got empirical evidence. This is the kind of truth you can literally dig up from the ground. You can test it, you can check it against historical records. It's tangible, and, importantly, it's falsifiable. You can potentially prove it wrong. But on the other hand, you have divine inspiration. This kind of truth isn't discovered, it's received. It comes through visions, through prophecy. It's not material, and as the source points out, you can't exactly carbon date a vision. Now, to make this idea of divine inspiration feel a little less, out there, the source uses a great comparison. Think about the wild intuitive leaps that led to huge breakthroughs, like in quantum physics. On a deep level, nobody really knows how it all works, but the formulas, which sometimes came to scientists in these flashes of insight, they just work. It's a kind of knowledge that isn't based on physical evidence, but it has very, very real effects on the world. Okay, so let's take that framework and apply it. Let's start by using that first measuring stick, empirical evidence, and hold it up against big, sweeping stories of the Old Testament. What do we find when we actually send in the archaeologists? Well, when you apply that purely empirical test, the results are pretty stark. For these huge foundational events like the Exodus, there are no Egyptian records of it. Solomon's legendary, magnificent temple, no direct physical proof has ever been found. The patriarchs like Abraham, no mention of them in any contemporary records outside the Bible itself. And a global flood covering the entire planet, that's flatly contradicted by, geology, paleontology, biology, you name it. And that leads to this crucial point. When you use a strictly scientific, evidence-based method, the conclusion a lot of scholars come to, and this includes secular Jewish experts, is that these huge narratives are more like foundational myths or, quote, pious fiction, maybe with some little seeds of historical truth sprinkled in. But, and this is so important to the argument, that doesn't mean the stories aren't true. It just means their truth belongs in that second category we talked about, divine inspiration. It means their truth isn't necessarily about historical, literal fact, but about the spiritual, moral, or prophetic meaning they carry. They are, as the source puts it, empirically flexible. So let's pivot now to the New Testament. We're going to apply that exact same empirical standard to its central claims. And this is where, according to the source, the whole story changes in a pretty dramatic way. The core argument here is that while the empirical proof from many of the Old Testament sagas is, pretty thin, the evidence for the historical existence of Jesus of Nazareth is on what the source calls an entirely different level. This isn't just about faith, it's about history. And here's where the evidence gets really interesting. The source points to accounts from non-Christian and even hostile sources.
I mean, think about it for a second. These are Roman and Jewish writers who had absolutely zero reason to make this story up. In fact, it was in their best interest to squash this new movement. But still, their own writings confirm the basic historical facts that Jesus existed, he had a following, and he was executed. I mean, just take the Roman senator Tacitus. He's writing around 116 CE, and he explicitly says that Christus, the guy that movement was named after, was executed by Pontius Pilate. And he even notes that this movement, which he calls a deadly superstition, had already spread all the way to the heart of the empire, to Rome itself. I mean, that is a powerful piece of evidence from an outside source. And it's not just words on a page. Archaeology actually provides physical context that backs this up. We found an inscription that names Pontius Pilate. We found the actual bone box of the high priest Caiaphas, a key figure in the story. And we found grim physical proof of just how brutal Roman crucifixion was, matching the descriptions in the Gospels.
Okay, so how does this whole distinction, this idea of an empirically flexible Old Testament and a more empirically grounded New Testament, help us understand that original conflict that started this whole thing?
Well, the source argues it really boils down to this. The power of the temple authorities was built on that divinely inspired scripture, a truth that was mystical, spiritual, and couldn't really be proven with hard evidence. Then along comes Jesus, claiming to be the tangible, real-world fulfillment of those very same scriptures. And suddenly, this wasn't just some theological debate. It was a direct threat to their entire power structure, which depended on them being the only ones who could interpret that mystical truth. And this is what brings us right back to where we started. The source makes the case that these ancient tensions are the exact same ones fueling the fights we see online and in the world today. And you can't deny the historical impact. The movement that came after the empirically attested life and death of this one man didn't just fizzle out. It exploded into a global faith of over 2 billion people. And it fundamentally rewired civilization as we know it. This is why the stakes still feel so incredibly high. All these arguments we see today about biblical literalism, the geopolitical fights over land promises from the Old Testament, the debates about who owns the correct interpretation, the source argues these are all just echoes of that original clash. It's the same modern fight between those who view the text as divinely inspired and flexible versus those who see it as historically fulfilled and concrete. So in the end, the argument is that what we see online, everything from that pastor's honest question to that other commenter's vicious hate, is really just the same fundamental power struggle from 2,000 years ago. It's the ancient conflict between two different kinds of truth, just playing out with modern hashtags and geopolitics thrown on top. Which really leaves us with one last big question to think about. Maybe the real debate isn't, is the Bible 100% true? Maybe the better question is, what kind of truth are we even looking for when we open it? Is it empirical history? Is it divine inspiration? And is it possible it could be both?